Feels good to be sitting down in front of the camera again. I had a few really indecisive months starting in summer of 2022. I had decided that I wasn't going to go back and work at the ranch in Arizona that I had been the chef at for the last 2 winters, and so I needed to find something new. I started kind of trying to optimize for things in my life that I didn't necessarily hold as core values to me, to sort of set the timeline a little bit when I got to Wyoming this summer. And I know there's always a transition period. I've talked before about the difficulty of transitioning to a new place when you do seasonal work. James Clear, he had a post on Instagram that I shared a few weeks ago about how when you end up in these new situations, like a big life-changing event, like a new job, or you move, or you have a baby, or start or end a relationship or something like that, that it typically takes 100 days to settle into that new routine. And when I shared that, I commented that when you're doing seasonal work, you don't really have 100 days. You don't have that luxury of taking 100 days to get accustomed to the new setting. You have to adapt a lot quicker if you want to build a routine and build strong habits, and you're trying to optimize for certain things. If you're just trying to go through life and live life and you're not really worried about that, then yeah, no big deal. I get to Wyoming, I'm not really shooting much, I'm not editing. I had filmed a whole bunch of stuff on my road trip over 2 weeks from Arizona to Wyoming. Didn't start editing it, didn't even look at it really. I had even told myself, like, I'll take a couple weeks and get settled in. But that couple weeks turned into the first like month and a half, 2 months of the season. And so halfway through the summer, I hadn't really shot much of anything. I hadn't edited much. Hadn't really had my hands on my creative tools, so to speak. You better not bump my tripod. Why don't you go lay down in your chair? You're gonna stay right there. No? No. No. I sort of lost track of my goals and my values, and I even looked at a full-time year-round job to be the chef at Timberline Lodge at Mount Hood in Oregon. And as much as I love that area, I've backpacked around Mount Hood twice. I think that came more from... heater kicked on again. So because I was kind of lost about what I wanted to do, I sort of focused in on the fact that job title has some status to it, status that I haven't really had in a job title before. And so that made me feel good about heading in that particular direction, but status isn't really a core value that I try to optimize for. So the first part of actually like living in alignment with your values is defining for yourself what you actually value. Now, I can't tell you what you should value, and I'm not saying that anyone should optimize for the things that I value, but in order to sort of progress and tell the story that I'm trying to tell, I'm going to talk a little bit about those things that I do value. Time is the only resource that we can't get more of. It's our most valuable resource, but most people don't treat it that way. Often doing things for the sake of pleasing others, or to add a bullet point to their resume, or just for the simple fact of not wanting to have an uncomfortable conversation or telling someone no. Time feels like it moves faster and faster the older I get, and so I want to try not to waste any more of it than I already have. I also value experiences, and there's a lot rolled into that, but I think a big aspect of that is adventure and exploration. And I don't really mean that in the sense of like adrenaline seeking, putting myself in life-threatening situations, but more along the lines of experiencing the things that are sort of part of the culture of the places that I've lived in, like fly fishing and backpacking and hiking and climbing and all that kind of stuff, skiing. I like to go out and do those things and have those experiences, and part of that is travel. Not in the sense that, you know, I think travel is different for a lot of people. A lot of people will tell you that they value travel, but travel for me is more about like experiencing the area more so than like, you know, traveling for the sake of luxury and relaxation and sitting on a beach. And while all those things are great, those aren't really the things that I think of when I talk about valuing experience. Helping people is also something that I consider a core value. I know that's really broad, and it's taken multiple forms for me over the years. It started with health and fitness and wanting to be a health coach and a personal trainer. Now it's a little bit more geared towards making videos like this and talking about life and cooking at Dude Ranches. If I stretch that out a little bit, I can kind of say that I'm helping people to enjoy their vacation more by eating the delicious food that I cook. And then I also get to have conversations with the staff at the places that I work and talk to them about life and the mistakes that I've made and experiences and stuff like that. Maybe the most important thing that I value is working towards building something for myself. And this has taken, just like with helping people, this has taken on a few different forms over the years. But I know that for me, I feel the most fulfilled when I'm moving towards my goals and I'm working on building something that I can call my own. And so designing my life in a way that allows me to do that is very, very important and is probably the biggest reason that I've made the changes that I've made over the last 6 months. Part of the reason why I'm making this video, and it's a big reason why I ended up where I ended up and why I've made the decisions that I've made recently. So when we look at decisions, I think we have to look at the decisions and the outcomes separately. A good decision is based on the available information that we have in front of us and the odds, and a good outcome happens or it doesn't. A good decision doesn't necessarily guarantee a good outcome. For example, it's statistically safer to fly across the country than it is to drive. But if you make the decision to fly across the country instead of drive and you die in a plane crash, that doesn't necessarily mean that you made a bad decision based on the bad outcome. This summer and fall, when I was trying to decide what I wanted to do and trying to make my decisions, I spent way too much time focusing on the potential outcomes rather than focusing on just the information that was actually available to me. And I initially accepted a job to be the head chef at a restaurant at a resort in Utah. And I would have had to live in Salt Lake City, so I started looking for a place to live. After a couple months of not really finding anything that was reasonably priced or pet friendly, I decided that I was going to consider other options. And the option that ended up making the most sense to me at the time was that I was going to stay in Wyoming and focus on finding paid jobs for photo and video. And the problem with this is that at that point, I had not had a paid job for photo or video. So it was a little bit premature to try to make that a full-time thing rather than a part-time thing. And it also wasn't really giving myself permission to continue to be bad at making videos. What I've realized now is that continuing to work full-time and considering myself a part-time creator, not relying on that for my income, means that I can continue to be bad at it and keep working at it and get better. But making the decision to stay there and only work part-time, even though that is my goal eventually, I was leapfrogging the whole process of trying to get better at this craft. So I drove home for Thanksgiving, and on the drive home, I was listening to some podcasts and some audiobooks about being a part-time creator, and listened to an audiobook called The Pathless Path that I'll talk a little bit more about later. But I heard a few things that really started to shift my mindset about what I should be doing, and I realized that staying in Wyoming and trying to make videos, and even if I was offering to make free videos to build my portfolio, which was part of the plan, that only working part-time, I wasn't really going to have enough money to go foot the bill for these adventurous type things. I was going to go pay my way for like a dog sled tour and like shoot that and make a free video, and like do a snowmobile tour through Yellowstone and pay for that all on my own. So like I had all these great ideas for these videos, but I needed more money in order to make all of that happen. While I was home for Thanksgiving, I applied for a few more jobs, reached out to some of the people that I had talked to over the summer about jobs at ski resorts, and within a couple of days, I had gotten hired to go work at a resort in Colorado. So I went back home, or left home, went back to Wyoming, and packed up all my stuff. And after a few pretty stressful days trying to figure out housing, I made my way to Colorado. Unfortunately, I realized pretty quickly after I got there that it just wasn't a great situation for me. I didn't love the job. what I thought was going to be about a 30-minute commute, or at least that's what Google Maps told me. I didn't know the area at all. And so once I got there, I realized that that 30-minute commute was over an hour each way almost every single day. So the combination of working a job that I didn't love, which I knew going into it that I wasn't going to love the job, that god-awful commute, and just sort of feeling like a cog in the machine. There's a reason that I've enjoyed working at these dude ranches, because they're small family-run operations, and then going back to work at a big company with thousands of employees, I felt like a cog in the machine. I have no desire whatsoever to live the kind of lifestyle where I wake up dreading going to work, I go to work and don't enjoy it, and then I come home completely drained of energy, and then just end up eating shitty food and going to bed. I want to have, even if the job that I have doesn't necessarily give me energy, I definitely don't want my full-time job to drain my energy, because I want to be able to create, I want to be able to make videos and take photos and do all that kind of shit. So I don't believe in continuing to suffer through something if you have the opportunity and the ability to change it. And I was having fun skiing on my day off when I was working at the resort, but that's just not enough of a reason for me to stay stagnant. Once you get over the fear of having an uncomfortable conversation with someone or worrying about what other people will say or think about you, it really opens up the opportunity to make better decisions for yourself. And I'm not saying that you should just change your mind on a whim with no thought whatsoever, even though that kind of feels a little bit like what I've done over the last few months. But you also shouldn't continue to suffer through something just because you've already sunk some time and effort and energy into it. Continuing to sink more time and effort and money into something just because you already have sunk time, effort, and money into something doesn't make a lot of sense, especially if you're pretty certain that it's not going to provide any benefit or reward, but we still talk ourselves into it anyway. And even if you've never heard of or you aren't familiar with the sunk cost fallacy, which is what this is, I would be willing to bet that at some point in your life you've made a decision based on this fallacy. And it's particularly evil because we know when we're doing this thing, we know as we're sinking more resources into whatever this is, we know that it's not going to have that payoff, but we continue to do it for the simple fact that we've already wasted that time and energy. A lot of people justify staying in a bad relationship because they've already spent however many years with this person, or staying in a job that they don't like because they've already invested all this time and effort into this company, and the company's given nothing back to you, but yet I'm gonna stay with it because I've already invested. It doesn't make a lot of sense. So I was pretty close to staying at that job and staying at the resort in Colorado for the next 3 months, and constantly struggling to find the time and energy to do the creative work that fulfills me. But I had opened up a line of communication to hopefully come back to the ranch in Arizona for next winter, because I had realized through this process that that really was the best situation for me, and being able to do what I wanted to do. So I opened up that line of communication, and the opportunity presented itself for me to come back to Arizona this winter. I can already hear the argument from some people saying, well, you gave your word to that company and you're going back on your word, and now they have to find someone to replace you, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I get that, but A, that company is going to be just fine. They're paying South American college students nickels and dimes and charging $9.50 for a slice of pizza and $12.50 for a bowl of chili. To play my own devil's advocate, I can see a little bit more of the argument of, well, you were a chef, you were a manager, you had people that were counting on you and you let them down. That I understand a little bit more, but I think once you get over the fact that that argument is based around ego, and that to think that I was that important to those people very much centered around my own ego. So yes, I did make good relationships with the people that I was working with, and I always tried to do right by them and be a positive influence in their work lives at least. People think about you way less than you think they do, then you're going to be able to, again, make better decisions for yourself. We're all the stars of our own movies. We're all concerned with ourselves, and we think way less about other people. But when we think about ourselves, we think that everybody else is constantly thinking about what we are doing or the decisions that we made, and they're constantly judging us, when that's rarely the case. And I think a lot of people have this mindset that you should never quit anything. But I think that you really just need to learn when it is time to quit. But I don't think that making decisions based on what's best for some giant organization or company is a recipe for your own personal success or happiness. Why would you make decisions for what's best for some company that doesn't even really know who you are and has no stake in you personally whatsoever? I know that might seem a little bit cynical, but I really think that we should all be doing what's best for us as individuals and not worrying about these billion-dollar companies. So I realized when the opportunity presented itself for me to come back to Arizona that I was going to have to make a decision pretty quickly, and I needed a more structured framework for making that decision. I needed to make sure that I was making the best decision based on the information that I had available and not worrying about what those outcomes necessarily were going to be. So Ali Abdaal, one of my favorite YouTubers, he has a great video about a decision-making framework, so I kind of started there. All right, one day of work in the books, and I'm back, and we're gonna finish this video. I wanted to be sure that I'd be able to look back and say, okay, that was a good decision independent of whatever the outcome is. So essentially the framework is just a series of questions that I sat down and asked myself and actually physically wrote out in my notebook. It ended up being like 4 pages worth of notes. Obviously I'm gonna shorten that down a little bit for this video. So the first question is, 1 year from now, will I regret not having started X? And for me, I've kind of already started making videos and putting them on YouTube, but the way that I approached this question was, would I regret not making the change to come to Arizona, because I knew that my creative work was probably going to suffer if I stayed in Colorado. Question number 2 is, what would my mental board of advisors say? And your mental board of advisors, I've heard this in a few places, but essentially it's just a group of people that that you look up to, that you consider mentors, but they probably don't know that you exist. I consider my mental board of advisors to be Seth Godin, Matt D'Avella, James Clear, Mark Manson, and Ryan Holiday. My mental board of advisors are authors and YouTubers and filmmakers. When I asked myself this question and consider what their advice would probably be to me, I had a hard time seeing any of them suggest that I do anything that didn't push me closer to accomplishing the things that actually matter to me in life and the things that actually give me a sense of fulfillment. The third question is, what is the risk of doing nothing? So what's the risk of just staying where you're at, continuing to follow the path that you're going down? It was the risk of losing my direction. If I went, 3 more months of not really creating much, not putting out videos, not having the time and energy to do those sorts of things, where would I be in 3 months? And I wasn't sure what the answer to that question was, but I knew that it probably wasn't a positive thing if I wanted to keep making progress towards those goals. The next question is, what core value am I optimizing for? And this is part of the reason that I talked a little bit about values at the beginning of this video. Was you first have to decide what your values are. In making the decision to come back to Arizona, I was optimizing for designing my life in a way that allowed me to do the work towards building something for myself. The next question is, on my deathbed, what will I regret not having done? And there's a book called The Top 5 Regrets of the Dying, and the number 1 regret of people on their deathbed is not having the courage to live a life true to myself, not a life that others expected of me. I mean, I don't really know what else to say about that. Every time I read that, it gives me chills. I spent a long time not living a life, not having the courage to live a life that felt true to myself. And over the last 7-ish years, I've been trying to sort of rectify that. The other 4 regrets in that book, I actually haven't read the book, by the way. I do plan to, but the other 4 regrets are interesting. I'm not going to get into all of them for the sake of the length of this video. Question number 6 is, how certain am I and how certain do I need to be? And this ties in a little bit to what I talked about earlier with the whole decisions and outcomes thing. We can only ever be certain that we're making the best decision based on the information that we have available, not on the outcome that we think we're going to get from that decision. The next question in this framework is, how might I treat this as an experiment? And the average person is pretty risk averse. So I think treating more things in your life like an experiment can be pretty beneficial for most people. Now, you don't want to treat everything like an experiment, especially if, you know, a lot of money is involved. I'm not ashamed to say I did borrow a little bit of money over the last couple of months. And so treating that like an experiment is a little bit risky because you run the risk of, how many times did I just say risk? But you run the risk of disappointing the people that you borrowed money from. And that was kind of something that was difficult for me, but I'm lucky enough to have people in my life that are willing to help, as well as not being afraid to ask for help when I know that I need it. You know, I would prefer not to have been in that situation, but I think if there's one thing that I'm still trying to really get better at in life, it's making better decisions with money. And that's beyond the scope of this video, but it just sort of came up right now as I was thinking through this question. So moving on. Getting down to the last couple questions in this framework, question number 8, I believe, is, do I want to be the type of person who does X? And asking myself this question for this specific decision came down to, do I want to be the type of person who doesn't like my job and feels like a cog in the machine and just wakes up and goes to work and doesn't do anything else other than that and lives for the weekend and watches Netflix and eats shitty food and is unhealthy? And I absolutely do not want to be the kind of person who does that. So that was a pretty easy question to answer in helping to make this decision. And then the last actual question in this framework, there's a couple more parts to it, but the last actual question is, does this energize or drain me? And this was a huge consideration in making this decision for me, because I was completely drained in the situation that I was in. And while the work that I do at the Dude Ranches doesn't always energize me, it rarely drains me. Just like with the last question, this was a pretty easy question to answer, leading towards the decision to come back to Arizona. All right, I had to change batteries on the camera, and I had to get my notebook for this next part. Try and do a little like overhead shot of what I wrote down for this, because it's like this little chart graph thing. So there's this thing called the quitting framework, but it looks a little bit like, no, not going to focus. There we go. This is a way to think about whether or not you should quit something. And I talked about quitting a little bit in the video already, but this breaks it down in really simple terms. Okay, so going through this as quickly as possible. The question is, why am I thinking of quitting? Typically, there are 2 reasons that someone would consider quitting something. The first being that it sucks. The second being that it's hard. Starting with, it sucks. If you're thinking of quitting because it sucks, then the question that you have to ask yourself is, do I think that I can make it not suck? If the answer is no, then quit. If you think you can make it not suck, then you have to ask yourself, is it worth the time and effort to try to make it not suck? Again, if the answer is no, then we quit. If the answer is yes, then we keep going. The other side of this quitting framework is thinking of quitting something because it's hard. The question that we have to ask ourselves on this side of the framework is the challenge worth the reward? If the answer to that question is no, then we quit. If the answer to that question is yes, then we keep going. It's as simple as that. This framework with all those other questions is what led me to make the decision to quit the job in Colorado and decide to come back to Arizona. If there's one thing that I was afraid of in making this decision, it was what people would think, friends and family specifically, what people would think about me making this decision and deciding to come back here. And I think part of that also comes back to ego and thinking that other people are thinking more about you and care more about what you're doing than what they actually do. Especially once I decided to make this video. I can put this video out now and I can sort of explain what I was thinking. And at that point, if someone still wants to judge me for the decisions that I've made, then that's on them. And it kind of was on them in the first place anyway. So going through this decision-making framework really helped me make this decision and gave me the confidence to know that no matter what happens over the next couple of months, that I know that I did my due diligence and made the decision that was the best decision with the information that I had available to me at the time. I already feel so much happier and more fulfilled, and like I'm back on the path to where I wanted to be at about this time a year ago, when I started making the decision to focus more on doing creative work. And speaking of my path, I mentioned earlier an audiobook that I listened to called The Pathless Path by Paul Millard. One big takeaway from that book is that the default path is easy because no one ever questions you, and you never feel the need to explain yourself. You don't ever have to explain yourself for working for the same company for 30 years and buying a house in the suburbs and getting married and having kids. No one questions that. So even if you're unhappy in that scenario, or you don't actually feel successful, but society calls you successful, you're not likely to make any changes. I like to think that I'm hopefully a little bit less fragile than the average person when it comes to change, but there's this idea that if you change your mind about something, that you aren't being consistent or you don't have integrity. And I think that that's kind of bullshit. Like so much of this, I think that this is a big problem with society today, that we think that good people and good leaders should never change their mind, that you make a decision about something and you stick with it no matter what. I was watching a podcast on YouTube recently with a professor named Grace Lordan. She wrote a book called Think Big, and she was talking about how she thinks that a quality of leaders in the future is going to be their ability to say, I don't know, I got it wrong, and I've changed my mind. And I think that's a really strong argument to why it's important to be comfortable with change and be comfortable with saying that you don't know something. But life is anything but certain, and pretending that it's not is just burying your head in the sand. But I really enjoy the journey and the process of figuring things out and trying to get better every day, as cliche as that might sound. So today, as I'm filming this, it makes it 10 days that I've been back in Arizona, and I already feel way more energized. I've been planning and shooting this video. It took a few days to get settled in. I feel healthier, I'm sleeping better. There's not really much that I would have to point to this being a bad decision as of right now, and I only see it getting better from here on out. It feels really good to be doing work that feels important again and be appreciated, and just feel more fulfilled and happy with the path that I'm on. And hopefully something that I talked about in this video resonated with you. Hopefully if you have a decision to make in the future, you can use this framework, or at least, maybe just a couple of the questions in that framework will be helpful for you, or maybe just the quitting framework. If you're doing something that sucks or it's hard, you can use that. But it'd be really cool if you watch this video, if you have a decision to make, if you write about it in the comments or send me a message or an email. If you need some help working through that decision with this framework, I'd be more than happy to help with that. I know I don't have a ton of people watching these videos yet, but like I said, helping people is a core value for me. So even if just one person sees this video and is able to make a decision that they can feel better about, then I'm happy with that. Truly and honestly, if you made it to the end of this video, thank you so much for watching. Hopefully it helped. I love you all.